March 27, 2026. NVIDIA stock fell 4.2% in a single session. $180 billion in market capitalization, gone before the closing bell. The worst performer on the Dow that day was not a struggling bank or a failing retailer. It was the company that makes the hardware every AI system on Earth runs on. The question is not why the stock dropped. The question is, what had to be true about the world for a chip company's R&D center in a city most people couldn't find on a map to become a declared military target of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard? To understand what just happened and why it was inevitable, you need to know what was built in that city and for whom. InfiniBand is not a brand name most people know. It is not a product you can buy in a store. It is a networking interconnect protocol, the invisible wiring that binds banks of GPUs into the coherent computing fabric that trains and runs AI models. ChatGPT uses it. Claude uses it. Every major AI system you have ever interacted with has almost certainly run on hardware that implements InfiniBand. The world's largest GPU clusters at AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google, Meta are stitched together with InfiniBand fabric. And InfiniBand was invented in 1999 in a startup founded by Eyal Waldman in the Israeli city of Yokneam. The company was called Mellanox Technologies. For 2 decades it grew quietly, invisibly, supplying the networking hardware that would eventually become the connective tissue of the AI revolution. In 2020, NVIDIA, valued at over $3 trillion today, acquired Mellanox for $6.9 billion. The Haifa area campus became NVIDIA's largest R&D center outside the United States. Roughly 6,000 engineers, 7 facilities, the single most concentrated node of AI infrastructure expertise on the planet, outside Silicon Valley. Eyal Waldman built the company. Jensen Huang bought it. Neither of them planned for what came next. Here's the sequence that matters. In 1999, Mellanox is founded. In 2021, a $1.2 billion contract called Project Nimbus is signed between the Israeli government and Amazon Web Services and Google to provide cloud computing and AI processing to the Israeli Ministry of Defense and other agencies. The U.S. government, meanwhile, has spent the period from 2019 to 2025 constructing what it calls a chip export control regime, a systematic effort to prevent adversaries, primarily China and Iran, from acquiring the advanced semiconductors needed to build AI at scale. The logic is simple. Control the chips, control who can build AI, restrict the tools, restrict the rival. By 2025, the U.S. export control apparatus has effectively created a 2-tier world, nations with AI infrastructure and nations without it. The explicit argument embedded in every regulatory filing, every executive order, every congressional testimony behind those controls is this: AI infrastructure is a strategic military asset. That framing was deliberate. It was designed to justify the restrictions, and it was about to travel in a direction no one in Washington had anticipated. Then came February 28, 2026, and everything that had been theoretical became operational. On February 28, 2026, U.S. and Israeli forces conducted Operation Epic Fury, airstrikes on Iranian territory that killed Supreme Leader Khamenei. 3 days later, on March 1st, Iranian drones struck 3 Amazon Web Services data centers in the Gulf, 2 in the UAE, 1 in Bahrain. Structural damage, fire suppression, water damage to server hardware. The first kinetic attack on major U.S. commercial technology infrastructure in history. AWS confirmed disrupted power delivery. Iran described the strikes as a deliberate probe of U.S. data center dependencies in the region. Then, on March 11th, the IRGC-linked Tasnim news agency published a document titled Enemy's Technological Infrastructure, Iran's New Targets in the Region. It listed 29 specific facilities: Amazon, 5, IBM, 6, Microsoft, 5, Google, 4, NVIDIA, 3, Oracle, 3. Palantir, 3. NVIDIA's entry identified the Haifa area campus by name, the former Mellanox headquarters, as NVIDIA's main and largest R&D center outside the U.S. A civilian evacuation advisory was issued. Evacuate at least 1 kilometer from any major tech office or data center. This was not a rogue threat. This was a formal military doctrine document. The question embedded in every line of it, which the document answered without quite saying out loud, was, why commercial tech companies? Why R&D campuses and not power grids or missile installations? The IRGC's answer was embedded in their own document, but you had to know where to look. To understand the IRGC's logic, you need to see the cascade. Layer 1, AI model outputs. Every system generating text, images, decisions. Layer 2, GPU cluster inference. The NVIDIA H100s running those models. Layer 3, InfiniBand networking. The Mellanox origin hardware binding the clusters together. Layer 4, the Haifa engineers. The 6,000 people who design, maintain, and improve that hardware. Layer 5, Israeli R&D concentration, the overwhelming share of InfiniBand's core development expertise located in a single geographic zone. Layer 6, IRGC targeting designation, a direct military threat to that zone. A second cascade runs in parallel. Iran has partial control over the Strait of Hormuz, which handles 20% of global petroleum transit. Taiwan, where TSMC manufactures over 90% of NVIDIA's chips, is 90% dependent on imported natural gas. Every 10% energy price increase raises global inflation by 0.5 point. Hormuz disruption cascades to TSMC electricity costs, which cascades to NVIDIA chip production, which cascades to global AI capacity. The IRGC's document cited 2 justifications for targeting these companies. Project Nimbus, the Israeli government's $1.2 billion cloud contract with AWS and Google, and the company's role in powering U.S. and Israeli military intelligence systems. Both justifications converge on a single structural argument. AI infrastructure is military infrastructure. But here's the part the IRGC document didn't say out loud, and the part that should make everyone in Washington deeply uncomfortable. The U.S. chip export control regime was built on an explicit formal argument. AI infrastructure is a strategic military asset. The government spent 5 years publishing that argument in executive orders, regulatory filings, and congressional testimony. The logic was, whoever controls AI hardware controls military advantage. The U.S. used that logic to restrict exports, to designate certain chips as controlled dual-use items, to build an entire foreign policy framework around denying adversaries access to the compute stack. The IRGC read that logic, the same causal chain, and applied it in reverse. If AI infrastructure is military infrastructure, then AI infrastructure is a legitimate military target. The boomerang. NVIDIA's Haifa campus didn't become a target because Iran resents technology companies. It became a target because the United States spent years making the most persuasive possible case that AI infrastructure is the most strategically important asset in the modern world, and the market understood what that meant. Jensen Huang stood at NVIDIA's GTC conference in San Jose in mid-March and declared the company 100% committed to Israel, personally affirming its Haifa operations. But the $180 billion single-session loss wasn't panic. It was a rational pricing of a world that had just changed its rules. So, what does a world that has formally accepted infrastructure warfare as a legitimate doctrine actually look like to live in? March 11, 2026 will probably be remembered as a threshold moment, not because it was the first attack on tech infrastructure. That happened March 1st, when the drones hit the AWS data centers in the Gulf, but because it was the first time a nation-state formally, publicly, doctrinally declared commercial AI R&D to be a legitimate military target. Before that date, AI companies operated globally, including in geopolitically complex regions, but no adversary had formally designated that presence as a strategic liability requiring a military response. After that date, the paradigm had changed. Every AI company with physical assets in a contested region now operates in a fundamentally different risk calculus. The 50% of multinational firms in Israel currently processing senior staff relocation requests are not overreacting. The PHLX semiconductor index entering correction territory is not noise. The Intel Kiryat Gat facility reporting engineering staff shortages, Apple's M-series chip design team under shelter-in-place protocols, these are not isolated incidents. They are symptoms of a world recalibrating in real time to a new category of conflict. Isle Waldman founded Mellanox in 1999 because Yokneam was where the engineering talent was. Jensen Huang acquired the company in 2020 because the technology was genuinely irreplaceable. Neither decision was wrong, but both decisions now belong to a geopolitical argument that neither man fully designed and that neither can fully control. The 6,000 engineers across those 7 facilities are not abstractions. They are the people whose specific, accumulated, hard-to-transfer expertise makes it possible for every AI system you have ever used to function. There is no cloud backup of that knowledge. There is no redundant facility waiting on standby. And as of March 31st, 2026, those engineers are in a war zone under an active targeting designation, continuing to work. This is what infrastructure warfare looks like from the inside. Not a cyber attack, not a supply chain disruption. A building, a specific building with a specific address in a specific city, listed in a formal military doctrine document published by a nation-state. The question for the next decade of AI development is no longer whether this kind of targeting happens. It already happened. The question is whether the companies building AI civilization and the governments that regulate them have a strategic framework adequate to the world they have created. As of today, the uncomfortable answer is not yet.